represent the British public, so far as the pollsters are concerned, just to get us some idea of where you stand. We've heard a mixture of views from you. Could I ask those who believe that the British government should give right of entry, right of abode in this country to those citizens of Hong Kong, those passport holders, to raise their hands for me? And now those who believe that that right should not be given to those citizens. And I would like to see, are there any don't knows among those? We have 2 don't knows. My clear assessment of that, perhaps rather surprisingly, is that a clear majority of you believe that the people of Hong Kong should be allowed to come here. And I just briefly want to go back to Hong Kong, if I could. David, we had a very clear view there of this audience, which we think is representative, that a majority should come. Can you just give a quick response there from the people of Hong Kong?
Yes, I should tell you there was a loud ripple of applause when that vote was taken here. Perhaps I could put the question to Martin Lee. What's your response to the views expressed and to that vote that was taken?
I'm very encouraged by it. It in fact supports what I've been saying, thinking all the time, that the people in Great Britain are honourable, but not the government.
David? David, thank you very much for that. And I'm going to come back here now to Sir Geoffrey. You heard what the people said in that audience, Sir Geoffrey. You heard what was said in Hong Kong. You saw that vote. We don't pretend that that is a precise referendum. However, it is a clear reflection that a large number of people do share the view that the people of Hong Kong should be allowed to come in here. In the light of that, and in the light of what you said about the anxieties concerning doubling potentially the ethnic minority of this country, do you think perhaps you may have rushed to judgment, misjudged the temper of the British people, the sense of honour that they have?
I think not. No, I can think that it's very understandable that an audience of this kind, assembled in a programme of this kind, presented with the case in such direct human terms as this, would feel that it wanted to respond in that way if it possibly could. I think one has to take one's mind back to the practicalities that were being emphasized by some people. If you take your mind back, you see, to the much smaller tragedy we faced when the East African nations were turned out of their home. We had then tens of thousands of people, only a very tiny handful. That created the most formidable problems. And I believe that those problems will be repeated on a much larger scale in face of the possibility of 3.25 million people from Hong Kong.
But given that the government's role in these matters and in others is to lead, would it not be incumbent on you, if this view that we've expressed here, and it's been a Gallup poll which has come up with very similar results, very even balance, isn't it incumbent on you, as it were, to seek to reflect that apparent tolerance rather than to shut it off with the view that apparently you believe the members of Parliament would hold if you sought to modify the law to let those people in?
One has to reflect all the factors, and I fully understand the extent to which people would like to reach out in this way. I fully understand.
Is a change possible?
I think one's got to think very, very deeply before one contemplated that possibility.
But if you...
the fact is, you see, if one looks at the whole problem, and Martin Lee raised a matter in a rather different sense. He said that he didn't even think we were trying to create a future for the people of Hong Kong. I hope and believe that those with whom I've worked there over the years we've been concerned know that we have actually put all our effort and all our energy to trying to establish a future on the basis of the agreement, which was warmly welcomed by the people of Hong Kong. Now, I fully understand the point made by some later on about the extent to which the events of recent weeks have shattered a view that has built up in the last 10 years. I fully understand why people are making the bid they're now making, that we've been discussing in this programme. But I come back to the fact that for a British government and the British Parliament to accept the obligation to admit 3.25 million people is an obligation we should have to regard as realistic. And I think it would be a very, very formidable step to commend that.
It would be, if I understand you correctly, unrealistic if the people of Britain were to say, no, it is not on, and then the consequences which you outlined at the beginning were to follow. If, however, your judgment became that those problems would not inevitably follow if the people of Britain shared the view that it was intolerable to contemplate what might happen to the people of Hong Kong. I put it to you that you would be under some obligation to reconsider your judgment.
I think that the position is one that we have, of course, to consider and reconsider the whole time. I come back to the fact of our immense and intense concern with the future of this territory and the people who live there. But one has to try and put it in the broader perspective without being driven to the commitment that you're trying to
I don't seek to drive you particularly to commitment, just to establish exactly what your position is. Would it not be an astute judgment to make that the best possible time to make any commitment, any ultimate guarantee, which you hope will not have to be honoured because you hope the Chinese government will return to civilized behaviour again, to make that judgment now and not perhaps down the road when things are much worse, when the prospect of social disorder within Hong Kong itself may be even more intense?
I think that there are 2 points I'd to pick up in that sentence you put to me. One is the recurrent phrase, make a judgment and an offer, which you hope will not have to be fulfilled. Every time the question is put on that basis, it is being put literally and directly on an irresponsible basis. One cannot make the change on the basis that it may not have to be fulfilled. And that was a point accepted by people in Hong Kong as well as here. If one is approaching the question on the footing that any undertaking might well, would have to be fulfilled, then I'd suggest to you that now is actually not the best time to be contemplating it, because now is a time when we're all deeply shocked and appalled by what's happened in Peking. And we need to spend some time looking at it in a rather longer perspective. I fully understand the sense of shock and dismay that is prevalent now, and I share it. But I don't think that it's the right time to make a fundamental change of judgment of that sort. The judgment that's still being upheld, the case that I'm putting, you see, is the one that commended itself clearly to Parliament 8 years ago. It's remained in place and largely unquestioned until now. I see why it's questioned now. I don't think now would be the right time to reach a conclusion in the opposite direction.
If you persist in the judgment because you believe it's the correct judgment, then down the road you also face the prospect that if you are wrong, if things turn out badly, then people could end up in Hong Kong in the same condition as we were horrified by when it happened in Peking. Not attractive for you to contemplate as a civilized human being, obviously, but possible for you to contemplate?
Grossly unattractive. The fact, of course, is that Hong Kong, in the years that have passed since the end of the war, has been confronted with possibilities of that kind very closely and very directly.
But you have the possibility, as the Foreign Secretary, to offer the sanctuary which would make that possibility an impossibility.
I'm afraid it would not do that, you see. The fact is that if you were to make the offer on the basis you're commending, on the footing that it's intended to provide a refuge for 3.25 million people, it's an offer that simply could not be fulfilled in those terms. I fully understand, totally understand the dismay, the anguish, the shock, the horror.
Forgive me, Sir Geoffrey, that is a point which you've properly made on several occasions in this interview. I want to put this final point to you, briefly. If the worst comes to the worst, then this government, you as Foreign Secretary, not you as an individual, as a Foreign Secretary, down the road may